All right, well, hello and welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's presentation. Are you ready to rock your resume? This is our first workshop in our series that we're having to help you students and alumni get prepared for our virtual career fair that's coming up on April 8th. So my name is Teresa. I'm a career counselor here at Roosevelt, and I'm here alongside Jennifer, who is our Director of Career Development Programming. And again, today we're really going to be talking about all things resume and with a little cover letter thrown in at the end as well to get you prepared on how to write those too. Please keep in mind that this presentation is being recorded, so fingers crossed, no technical issues. That means this will get posted on our YouTube channel, Roosevelt University Career Development. You can find us on YouTube there. It will also, the link will also be emailed to everyone who registered to participate today, so you can review this, then the information after the fact. If you do have any questions as we go through the material today, please feel free to type those in the chat box. We'll try to get to some questions throughout the course of the presentation, but if we don't get to yours right away, if we miss it, we will be answering questions, saving time at the end of the presentation as well. So definitely feel free to throw any questions that you have throughout the presentation in the chat box. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jennifer to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. So basically the purpose of your resume is it's a marketing document to highlight all your strengths and transferable skills that you can bring to the employer. You want to make it factual. You don't want to over exaggerate on your qualifications. You certainly don't want to lie. And you want to stick to 1 to 2 pages. And that can vary depending on your amount of experience and where you're at in your career. If you're a current student and maybe you've had 1 or 2 or no jobs, you really want to stick to a 1-page document. If you are an alumnus and you've been in the field for 5 years or longer, it's okay to have a 2-page resume. If you are an alumnus and you have been in your profession for longer than 10 years, the general rule of thumb is that you want to focus on experiences that are 10 years and more recent. So you don't want to go back 20 years and share everything in your history on a resume. You want to keep it to just the past 10 years. And the most important thing is you want to make sure you're tailoring your resume to each position. You may be applying to different types of positions, maybe in some different industries, depending on what your background is. And so you really want to make sure that when you're reading the job posting, you're tailoring your resume to that specific position and company or organization.
All right, another thing that you want to remember to do as you're getting ready to write your resume is to really do your research. And that means researching not only the position that you are wanting to apply for, but also researching the company. And this, again, is going to be really important for those of you who are attending the virtual fair. The list of participating employers is up on Handshake, so you can view that to get an idea of who will be there and sign up for either individual or group sessions to speak with the employer. So you want to make sure you're doing some research ahead of time into what positions they have available, if they do have that information available ahead of time, as well as just learning a little bit of information about the company or the organization itself. So in general, when you are going to apply for a position, it's really important when you're writing your resumes to read over the job posting very carefully. I always say go through the job posting with a fine-tooth comb. Take note of those key words that are being used in the posting. And then if you have those skills or experience that they're mentioning in the posting, you want to make sure that that information is reflected somewhere on your resume so that it matches up as closely to the posting as possible. Some different research methods that you can use beyond just looking at the posting itself is to, of course, what do we do whenever we have a question these days, right? We Google it. So just Google the name of the company. What information can you find out about the organization? Who are their competitors? That's really important to learn as well. And what types of challenges is the company facing? How can you help with those challenges that they're facing? What kind of value can you add or bring to the organization? Those are all things that you want to start thinking about even before you really start writing your resume. Another way to research an organization is by taking a look at their social media pages. So it can be anything from LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever social media pages that they have available. A lot of times that can give you a little bit more insight into the culture of the organization. Of course, right now it might be a little bit different because of COVID, with more and more people working from home still. But when you look at their pictures, what types of clothing are they wearing? What does the office environment look like? Those are all little clues that can give you some information about what it might be to actually work within that organization. Of course, asking industry experts and using your network to your advantage as well. What do they know about the company? What do they know about the industry in general? That can be really great insight when you are getting ready to write your resume to present to this organization as well. Looking at reviews, of course, Glassdoor is a great website, glassdoor.com, for those of you who have never been on there. Past or current employees are able to write reviews, pros and cons of what it's like to work for an organization. Of course, just like any other reviews that we read on the internet, we want to take those with a grain of salt. Sometimes people just use reviews as an opportunity to vent or complain. But if you kind of see a pattern within those reviews, if multiple employees are saying the same pros or the same cons, that again can kind of give you some insight as to what it might be like to actually work for that particular organization. Doing an image search, again, that kind of goes back to what I mentioned about social media and just getting a better overall sense of what the actual office or company or corporate events look like. And then, of course, looking at their company website. So what is their mission statement? This is going to be really, really important for you to know when you're crafting your resume, your cover letter, especially when you go to actually interview with the company, or if you're meeting with the company during the virtual fair, to know something about them already. What is their mission? How do you see yourself fitting into that? So this is all research that you can start to do even before you start tackling your resume.
Okay, and so while you're doing this research, you want to start taking notes, either jot them physically down or in your head, but look at the keywords from the job posting. How can you incorporate those keywords into your resume in such a way where it is, qualifications that you meet? So obviously, if it's asking that you have certain qualifications that you don't meet, you don't want to say you do. But you do want to take note of those keywords because the person reviewing your resume is also going to be looking for those keywords to see if you have that in your background. You want to know how are you going to fit in the organization? I think we've all been in a situation where we saw a job posting and we thought, oh my gosh, it sounds like my dream job. And then you research the company and it's, no, I don't want to be there. I'm not going to be a good fit there. So it is important. Not only are you only trying to interview and get in with the company, but you also want to make sure that this is a place that you want to work for and spend, most of your time every day at. And then obviously, how are you qualified? And why are you qualified? So when you're doing this research, you also want to have in the back of your mind how you can demonstrate this on your resume to the employer.
So something really, really important to keep in mind is that the average employer typically doesn't spend a whole lot of time reviewing a resume. Sometimes we feel like we have to put every last thing we've ever done, all our jobs on our resume or all our extracurricular activities. And the truth of the matter is, again, you really want to focus on that information that's going to help show why and how you're marketable for the position you are applying for. And you want to have a really clean and consistent format. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But keep in mind, there's different numbers and statistics out there, but according to NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, The average time an employer spends reviewing a resume is 6 seconds. So keep that in mind when you're writing your resume. Again, you want to really have that clean format. Make sure that you're really focusing in on that key information that's going to be most important for employers to know about you, because chances are whoever is looking at your resume is not going to be spending 30 minutes or 10 minutes or however long to read it line by line. They might just be doing a quick skim through it. So definitely very important to keep in mind when you're writing your resume.
And so this is why having a strong resume is so important, because you only have a few seconds to make that good impression. One thing to keep in mind is that for one opening, the HR department or whoever's reviewing the resumes, they may have hundreds of these resumes for one position. And so they're going to scan as quickly as possible to find, a few candidates that they think are top notch. And you don't want to give the recruiter any reason to put your resume in the no pile if you have a small typo or grammatical errors. And we have this little graphic here because I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people put on their resume that they, amongst their skills, are attention to detail, and they have glaring typos. And so just don't put that on your resume. Don't put good attention to detail, because we'll talk about skills in a second here. But if you do have a typo on your resume, then that's going to totally negate that. Rather than saying you have good attention to detail, you want to demonstrate how you have good attention to detail.
All right, so this is just a quick intro into some common sections that go on a resume, and we're going to go into more detail about all these different sections momentarily here. But basic sections that belong on a resume, of course, your contact information right at the top, professional summary, which is an optional section. You may or may not have that on your resume. And then, of course, your education section, professional experience, which can include work experience, internships, volunteer experience, depending again on how you format and organize everything, as well as any kind of computer or technical skills or language skills as well, if you are fluent in another language. So like I said, we're going to get into some more details about all of these individual sections here.
Okay, so the first one is your contact info. So our first recommendation, if you don't already have one, is make sure you have a professional sounding email address. And we recommend some type of variation of your first and last name, or first initial last name, and then whatever email system that you use. Obviously, you want to have your name, your full name on your resume. And it's okay to have your name in a larger size font, because you do want your name to stand out at the top of your resume. Back in the Stone Age, when I was graduating from college and going into the job pool here, we didn't apply over email. We didn't apply online. It was good old US postal mail. So we had to write our full street address on our resume. These days, it's not necessary. It's perfectly acceptable to just list your city, state, and zip for your address. In some instances, it's hard to prove, but people say you could potentially be discriminated against if you lived in a certain part of a town somewhere. So that's why I always recommend to students just do city, state, and zip, so that you don't have to worry about that. And then hopefully you have a LinkedIn profile. And so you also want to make sure you include your LinkedIn profile or URL, or if you're like an IMC marketing student, graphics designer student, if you have an e-portfolio or some type of online blog, you want to make sure that you have your links to those as well. But definitely, if you have partycutie@hotmail.com as your email address, you're perfectly fine to keep that, but just choose something different for the email that you're sending out for your professional resume.
Yes, and one other thing too I wanted to add is to also make sure, we don't have it on the slide here, but make sure that you also have your phone number on your resume, and
yes.
Make sure that it's the right number. I have I can tell you from resumes I've reviewed in the past, sometimes people, you're just typing your phone number really quickly and you might add in an extra digit or you might leave a digit out. And if that's the case and the employer's interested and they want to call you and they're not able to reach you, well, obviously you just kind of cut yourself short of possibly getting that position. So really important to proofread everything. Okay, so going on to the professional summary. I know I had mentioned before that this is an optional section. So some people might opt to have this section on their resume and some may not. And either way, that's okay. You want to do what works best for you. And there's no kind of just one magic, one size fits all formula for everybody when it comes to a resume. So a professional summary, essentially, if you do decide you want to include one on your resume, is a way to introduce yourself to the employer and essentially give those key points that are going to serve as a really great, solid introduction as to who you are as a candidate. So you want to describe any type of relevant skills, education, experience you have, things that, again, are going to give that solid, give the employer a solid understanding of how you're defining or identifying yourself as a candidate. Typically, it's going to be no more than 3 to 4 sentences long. And it's okay if it is shorter than that. If it's only 1 or 2 sentences, that's fine. It doesn't have to be 3 to 4 sentences. You really just kind of want to work within that space and take the number of sentences that you want or that you need in order to give that solid introduction. So again, there's a couple of examples here. I won't read these out loud. But if you are somebody who is maybe a little bit more entry level and you still want to have that intro section on your resume, you can even start out by saying current student majoring in psychology, for example, with skills in XYZ and experience in ABC. There you go. You can just fill in those blanks with those relevant skills you have. Those skills can come from even if you don't actually have the direct work experience in the field quite yet, if you're looking for more of an entry level position. But that right there is just a basic sentence where you can fill in those blanks and add in those key skills and experiences that you want the employer to know right off the bat about you. Anything to add on that, Jennifer?
No, I would just say if you were a student, rather than calling it professional summary, I would just call it summary. That would just be my only other suggestion.
All right.
Okay, education section. So if you are a current student who either you're a current student or you're getting ready to graduate, we would recommend you put your education section next. If you're someone who's an alumnus and you're seasoned, you're probably going to list your education section towards the bottom. So we understand that we have a diverse audience here, and like Teresa said, one size doesn't fit all. So depending on where you're at in your career is where we would, what we would recommend to you as an individual. A lot of this is individualistic, unfortunately. But for the education section, you would list the institutions for which you have completed a degree or if you're currently attending. So sometimes we see students who may have attended somewhere and then transferred over to Roosevelt. If you didn't complete a degree there, like an associate's or a bachelor's, then it's really not necessary to list it on your resume. It's assumed that the institutions you're putting on your resume is where you're going to be getting your degree from. And if you're a current student, you want to make sure you omit your high school. I know high school is really important for a lot of us, and you probably did some great things, good student activities. But now that you're a college student, you want to make sure you focus more on your collegiate career, your professional career. You want to make sure you list the dates that you graduated, month and year. And if you are a current student, you want to list the anticipated graduation date. Be sure that you list your degree name and major. This is an area where I think a lot of students aren't really sure what the full title of their degree is. So if you're a current student, it should say on your degree works. So for example, if you're a management major, you don't have a bachelor's in management, you have a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. We left out science here, with a major in management. Same like if you're psychology, you don't have a bachelor's in psychology, you have a Bachelor of Arts in psychology. Teresa, is there anything else you want to add on education?
I would say the only other thing that you might add on to your education besides this basic information is like if you have a high GPA. So for example, if you have a GPA
Yes.
of 3.0 or higher, you can choose if you want to put that on there. Any scholarships you've received, extracurricular activities that you've been involved in. If you're not going to have a separate section to kind of highlight those and expand on that information, if you just want to have a bullet point that says extracurricular activities and list what organizations you've been a part of, that's an option as well. So that will vary depending on each individual student situation.
Someone anonymous has asked the question, how can we find out the degree name if we aren't sure? If you're an alumnus, it should say on your actual official transcript. If you're a current student, it's going to say it on your degree works. There's an area where it shows you your degree title and then your major. Unfortunately, it doesn't show it on RU Access transcript. If you want to send us an email at career@roosevelt.edu, we can help you find that. Thank you for that question.
Great. All right, going on to the professional experience section, or sometimes people will call this section work experience. Key information that you want to have here is similar to the education section, where you want to make sure you have the company name, the location, meaning just the city and state, you don't need the full address, your job title, as well as your dates of employment. And if you are listing a current position on your resume, you want to have your quote unquote end date listed as present to show that you are still working within that position. So those are your 4 basic pieces of information that you want to have on for each position you're listing. And then you want to have bullet points underneath that to describe different things that you did and accomplished while you were in that role. And we're going to give an example of a bullet point on the next slide here. But in general, you really want to make sure within your bullet points that you're focusing not only on your job duties and responsibilities, but also on any kind of specific results, accomplishments, or achievements you've had. So you don't want to just talk about your duties and responsibilities or what you did, but you also want to talk about why you did those different things or how you did those different things, and then expand on that by incorporating some of those specific accomplishments and results. That's all information that's going to help differentiate you from other candidates who might have similar experience as you who are applying for the same position. While they may have similar job duties and experience responsibilities as you, they're not going to have all of those same results, accomplishments, and achievements. So that's why it's so important to show employers what kind of value you've really been able to add within the different positions that you've held before. You, of course, want to quantify that information when you can. So for example, if you helped increase sales, can you give a certain percentage of how much you helped increase sales by? Sometimes we don't always have that information available, so you never want to just make up numbers or say, well, I think it might have been 50%. You only want to quantify that information if you have those numbers available and you know that they're accurate. So something very important to keep in mind there. Also, when you're writing your bullet points, you want to make sure that you're starting each one with a verb. So we don't use personal pronouns on resumes. You would never say, I counsel students. You would start with the word counsel. That's going to be your strong action verb. And you want to avoid starting your bullet points with responsible for. So you don't want to have every last bullet point on your resume saying responsible for A, responsible for B, responsible for C. You do want to make sure that you're mixing it up and starting each bullet with some different verbs. Of course, your bullet points, again here, they're helping to answer that question, why the employer should hire you. Or a lot of times we look at the resume as a way to get to the interview phase. So why would this employer want to interview you? Why do they want to bring you in for that next step after they take a look at your resume? And that's, again, where incorporating some of that information about your specific results and achievements is really important. So you can show them, again, what you've been able to contribute previously. As far as how many bullet points to list per position, this can vary a little bit just depending on what type of roles you've had and how long you've been within different roles. But on average, you can include about 3 to 5 bullet points for each position. Again, it's okay if you include less than that. It's okay to include more than that. But what you want to avoid is having a long list of 20 bullet points, because we include the bullet points on the resume to help make it easier to read. Again, if somebody's just kind of doing a quick skim through it, it's very easy to kind of follow and go through those bullet points. But if you're including a super, super long list of bullet points, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of why you use the bullet points in the first place. And everything just kind of looks like one big block of text. So again, this kind of goes back to the whole idea of really focusing in on the information that's going to help show why you're marketable for the position. So you don't necessarily need to list every last thing you've ever done for all your positions on your resume, but really just focus in on the key points that are going to help show how and why you're qualified for the role you're applying for.
The only other thing I would add, my only other tip, is for those of you who may already have a resume and maybe you're updating it or polishing it up. One of the most frequent mistakes we see is in the experience section with verb tense. So make sure if the job has already ended that you're going back and you are adjusting the verb to past tense. So Teresa, a great question came up. Someone has said, I'm an older student who has worked full-time with many companies. How often, if all, will new hiring companies check former salaries earned through such places as Social Security Administration? My understanding is that there was a law passed in the state of Illinois where, they used to be able to ask that question on applications. And I think this varies by state. But if you're in the state of Illinois, I don't think they can seek out that information anymore. They have to advertise. Yeah, they have to advertise, whatever the salary is, it is, and they can't change it just based on, oh, you made $10,000 less. Okay, well then we're just going to give you, a couple $1,000s more then because you were willing to work at that. No, they're not supposed to be doing that in the state of Illinois. So hopefully you're in Illinois and you should be okay. Okay. So this is the evolution of a bullet point. And I just absolutely love this screen slide because I think when I was starting out, I can talk for myself, this was the part that I struggled with the most. And I think probably most people do. It's taking what you've done and expanding on it so that it's more impressive than just saying, well, I planned events. Okay. What type of events? I planned events on campus. Okay. What was the goal? Planned events on campus to increase student involvement. How many? Well, I planned 5 on-campus events per semester to increase student involvement. So you can see in this situation, that's how they're quantifying it, by the number and by semester. And then the ultimate final version is planned 5 on-campus events per semester, which resulted in a 10% increase in student involvement. So that sounds a lot, it gives you so much more detail and information than what you started with just planning events.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is great for current students to see as well. Again, if you're somebody who doesn't already have a ton of work experience under your belt, but you have been involved in extracurricular activities, this is a great example of information that you can still put on your resume to show what value you've been able to add with the experience that you do have. So I know I get that a lot of times in my one-on-one career counseling appointments when we're talking about resumes and we're talking about putting that focus on results and achievements. And a lot of times students might say to me, it's like, well, I don't really have very much experience, or I only worked in a customer service position, or I only did this. It's really trying to think outside the box, right? And really think about, regardless of what kind of level of position that you are in, what kind of value are you really able to add within that? And again, in this example, you can apply that to any types of extracurricular activities you were involved in as well. So moving on to our next slide here, additional skills. And again, no one size fits all. This can certainly vary just depending on your personal knowledge and skill level, as well as the type of position you're applying for. But just some other sections that you may or may not include on your resume can have to do with computer and technical skills. So certainly if you are looking for anything where you're going to be doing any kind of administrative work, letting them know what types of software or programs that you're knowledgeable of. If you are applying for a job within marketing or a position where you might be managing social media accounts, letting them know what platforms that you are familiar or proficient in. So anything that's industry specific as well, for example, HR software, accounting software, if it says it's required or they prefer somebody to have that knowledge in the job posting, and you are familiar with that platform or with that program, then you want to make sure that you do have that reflected on your resume. Healthcare majors, any kind of tools, instruments related to medical tasks, also any science majors, any type of lab equipment, if you're looking for research positions or positions where you are going to be working in a lab, letting an employer know what types of lab equipment and things that you've already gained familiarity with and you're proficient in, that certainly can be added to your resume. And then language skills, of course, if you are fluent in another language, never underestimate the marketability of that. Again, look back at that job posting. Do they prefer or require somebody to be fluent in another language? If so, you want to make sure that you have that skill highlighted somewhere on your resume. I know I've worked with a lot of students in the past who will say, oh yeah, I'm fluent in Spanish, but they have it all the way down at the bottom of their resume and it's kind of hidden and you have to kind of dig for it. But if it's required or preferred for the position, you want to make sure you have that information closer to the top and never underestimate how marketable of a skill that is.
Great suggestion. Okay, so these following are, optional sections depending on your unique experience and how much room you have left on your resume. Definitely, if you have honors and awards, you want to make sure you're including those. Extracurricular activities are always good because it shows that you're a well-rounded individual. Employers love to see volunteer experience. Most people won't have publication, right? But depending on the area that you're going into, if you're, doing research and maybe you're getting published in journals based on your research, if you want to become a professor, you're going to have to do publications. Definitely professional affiliations. Most disciplines have some type of professional organization. So like for us, ours is NACE, National Association for Colleges and Employers. And a lot of times they will give a decreased membership fee for students. So take advantage of that because that is another way that you can network and get more information, more insight, and hopefully get your foot into the door to internship opportunities and job opportunities. So again, these are all optional depending on your unique situation and experiences.
Yes, and keep in mind too, for students and alumni both, if you are having a hard time determining what sections you should and shouldn't include, what information you should and shouldn't include, we are here to have career counseling appointments with you. So we can certainly talk about your resume and talk about different ideas and things like that. So keep that in mind that even after this presentation, you're not just kind of expected to do it on your own. You can always contact us with any questions you have or schedule an appointment to go over your individual resume. So next thing we're going to talk about here, we've been talking a lot about what to include, but now we're going to talk about some things that you should not include on your resume. So keep in mind, again, I've made this point earlier on, but your resume is not your autobiography. So you don't need to list every last thing that you've done on your resume. Just really focus in on the key information that's going to help show why and how you're a marketable candidate for what you're applying for. You do not want to include pictures or any kind of personal information on your resume, like your age, birthday, all that stuff. And this is something that is very different from those of you who might be from other countries. Pictures and personal information is something that's quite common to see on a resume or CV in other countries, but in the United States, that's all information that we do not include. Personal pronouns, again, I believe I talked about this when we were talking about the professional experience or work experience section. You don't want to say, I did this or I handled that. On the resume, we chop out all personal pronouns and just start statements with the verb itself. You never want to use different colored font. I know sometimes when I tell students that, when they've created this kind of fancy document with graphics and pictures and pretty colors, and I say, oh, everything should really just be typed in all black. I know sometimes that's kind of a downer for, for people to hear, but for the most part, unless you're applying for a graphic design or some type of creative position, for the most part, you do want to just make sure that you have your resume just typed out, everything in black. Hobbies, interests, it's all information, again, that does not show how and why you're marketable. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing your space and not focusing on information that employers are not going to be concerned with. I know Jennifer already mentioned high school information. The longer it's been since you graduated from high school, the less important that information will be on your resume or to an employer. An objective statement. So we talked about a professional summary statement or section that you can include earlier. And this kind of essentially replaces an objective. An objective we used to see on resumes all the time back in the day, but that trend has really changed. And the reason for that is because an objective puts the focus on what you as the candidate are looking for. When again, we're thinking about that resume as a marketing document, you want to put that focus not on what you're looking for, but on what you have to offer the employer and what makes you a good, solid candidate. So that's why we don't suggest or see objectives on resumes any longer. A references section, this can be whether you're actually listing your references or you just have that statement references available upon request. That does not need to be included on your resume. The reason for that is because if an employer wants to get references from you, they're going to assume that they can ask you and you'll be able to provide those to them. So instead of wasting or taking up the space on your resume to include that information, you can just assume that if the employer wants references, that you will be asked for them. Last thing I wanted to mention here is to avoid using templates. Can't stress this point enough. I know for me, as somebody working in career counseling and I'm looking at resumes all the time, when I open up a resume a student has emailed to me, I can tell right away if it's a template. And why is that? Because I've seen it like 100 other times. So keep that in mind. Recruiters and hiring managers, they're looking at resumes all the time too. And you don't want that to be the first thing that stands out about you, right? Like, oh, they used a template because this resume looks like everybody else's who's applying for the position as well. Unfortunately, a lot of templates I've seen too aren't necessarily the best quality templates. A lot of them use colors, a lot of them use graphics, text boxes. Those are all things that we want to avoid using on resumes. So keep that in mind. Try to avoid using a template. And if you need resources to help you get started with writing your resume, you can reach out to our office and we can certainly provide you with some to help you get started.
Okay. Can we go back to that previous screen?
Oh, sure.
There's just a couple things I want to add. So templates, usually any template you Google, if you find one that has color on it, that's an indication that it's a bad template because resumes should not have color on them. And a lot of times, even the formatting of them is goofy. It's like different size fonts throughout the document. It's not consistent. If you see a format of a resume somewhere that you think looks really nice, the best way to do it is to just start with a new Word document and type it out yourself. But a lot of times when you're working from a template, it's going to be hard to update as you move along. And like Teresa said, it's not going to be the best format. The other thing I wanted to talk about is when you do make your reference list, make sure you're asking your references first if they can give you a positive reference. And don't assume if you ask them 5 or 10 years earlier if they're still willing to give you. You want to make sure that when you are on the job market, you're reaching out to them and you are asking them and letting them know that you're on the job market so that they aren't caught off guard if someone calls them and asks about you for a reference. That has happened to me where I've had former employees who've been gone for like 10 or 15 years, didn't even tell me. And it's very awkward when you pick up the phone and it's like, oh, okay. The hiring manager is going to assume that you've already had that conversation. So you don't want to surprise your references. We did get a really great question, Teresa. One of the participants says, many of the companies I worked for are no longer in business. Former managers, coworkers are either retired or in some cases have even passed away. How would a new company do a company check on years worked, et cetera, if the company was torn down? I would think there's different companies that do employee background checks. And I honestly, since I'm not an HR person, I can't answer this with 100%, being sure. But I would think that somewhere they can confirm at least dates employed. Teresa, do you have any idea? Have you ever dealt with this?
Yeah, just depending on the company itself. Chances are there's still record somewhere, or it would still show in like a background check. Again, I'm not an HR person either, so I don't know all the ins and outs behind that. But I think regardless of whether the company is still in business or anything along those lines, your experience is what it is, and that you still want to present it in that way. And if the employer who you are interviewing with or in conversation with has question about that, you can certainly explain if the company is no longer in business.
Okay, next slide.
Okay.
We're running out of time, so we want to make sure we have enough time for questions. Just some formatting tips, quick formatting tips. Choose a font that's very legible and professional looking. Some examples we give are Calibri, Arial, Cambria, Times New Roman. You don't want to do anything where they're scrunched together, hard to read. Make sure you don't use Comic Sans. Some majors where they're told, oh, be creative in your resume, but you don't want to use Comic Sans. That's the one that looks like it's a child writing in crayon. That's not what they mean when they say be creative. Make sure your font isn't any smaller than 10 point, but also no larger than 12 point. And you want to make sure it's consistent. The only exception is your name. You can have your name be larger so it stands out more. Margins can be as narrow as 1/2 inch and as wide as 1 inch. And you can use bold, you can use all caps, and you can use italics to distinguish different areas of your resume, such as like each title at each organization that you worked with at, you might want to do that in bold, and maybe each institution you attended, maybe you do that in italic. So it's just different ways to kind of make your resume stand out and look nice. And then make sure that you're using reverse chronological order throughout your entire resume. So your education section, your most recent institution attended is going to be on top. The oldest will be on bottom. Same with employment. Your current or most recent employment will be on top, and then you want to work your way backwards.
All right, so that's information on resumes. We do have just a little bit of information about cover letters that we want to cover as well. We won't spend a ton of time on this because we do want to save time for question and answer. But really quick, cover letters. For those of you who have never had to write one and aren't quite sure what exactly it is or what goes into a cover letter, this is basically a letter that you write to an employer when you're applying for a position that introduces yourself and it expresses your interest in not only the position, but the organization as well. So I always tell students and alumni that I work with that while your resume is all factual, it's this is where I went to school, this is where I work, it's all facts about yourself. Your cover letter is an opportunity for you to tell the story behind those facts. It should be tailored to each position, and they go together like peanut butter and jelly, right? It should be submitted with your resume, even if it's not required. And really the only times I would tell somebody not to submit a cover letter along with their resume is if the employer specifically says they do not want you to submit a cover letter, or if you are not going to take the time to tailor it. So if you are just going to write one general cover letter that you could use to apply for an accounting role, as well as a teaching role, as well as a customer service role, then honestly, you're better off not including one, because if it's not tailored, it's not going to help show why you're a marketable candidate and how you're a good fit.
So these are just we're going to go over the basic parts of the cover letter. So you're going to have your contact info. It should be in agreement with what you have on your resume. So name, address, cities. You don't need to have your street address. If you do city, state, and zip, that's fine. Phone number and email address, the date. It's great if you can find out the contact name and the title of the person. If you can't, a good runner-up is Dear Hiring Manager, Dear Selection Committee. It's best if you contact the Office of Human Resources to kind of find out, is it going to be a person? Is it going to be a committee? Who can you address the letter to? And then obviously their contact info. And then I can't see the bottom of the screen, Teresa. Can you scroll up?
The dear hiring manager. I can't scroll since we're on the presentation form, but it's just the greeting. So where it says dear hiring manager, just avoiding saying to whom it may concern. Of course, if you have the person's actual name, you can put it there, but otherwise it's best to say dear hiring manager, dear hiring team, something along those lines.
But also make sure if you put the person's name, you have the right name.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that happen before too. It's like, okay, well, I'm the hiring manager, but that's not my name. And then we can also tell.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we can also tell when you haven't made it specific to that institution, when it's just a template you're using, because a lot of times people are forgetting to take out what other company you might like address it. I'm looking at an application that says, I'm excited to apply for this career counselor position at DePaul University. Okay, you're out. We're not DePaul. So you want to make sure that you're double checking and making sure, you've really tailored it to that organization.
All right. So here we're just talking again, just briefly about content. Again, if people have questions about cover letters, or you need resources to help you get started, or if you have a rough draft put together that you want reviewed, you can certainly send that over to our office or schedule a career counseling appointment. We can go over that with you. But in general, your cover letter is going to be about 3 to 4 paragraphs long. Your first paragraph, you want to always make sure that you are identifying the specific position that you are applying for, as well as where you found the posting. So I'm writing to apply for the HR generalist position that is currently posted on your company website, saying something like that. Also an attention grabber in that first paragraph there. So maybe what drew you to want to apply for this position? Just a brief statement that you can give about yourself that will hopefully make the employer want to keep reading on within your cover letter. Your middle paragraphs, you want to talk about why and how you're qualified for the position. You don't want it to be just an exact repeat of the information you already have on your resume put into paragraph form. But of course, we only have so much room to work with on a resume, right? But so if there's certain experience you have that you want to get into more detail about or expand on, a cover letter is a great opportunity for you to do that, and to get into more some of the details that you don't have the room for within your resume. So again, thinking about what your education has been, your research, work, volunteer experience, what type of experience is going to help show and tell that story as to why you're a good fit and qualified for the role. On the flip side of that as well, you also want to cover the cultural fit. So again, remember that research that you did earlier on that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. Um, Thinking about their mission, thinking about the population or clients that they serve. How is that a good fit for you? How does that fit in well with your own values or what you want to achieve within your career? Really make sure that you're expanding on that in your cover letter and mentioning those things, because that's all information that's not mentioned anywhere on your resume, right? So this is all going to be different information that the employer can learn about you. Last paragraph, you're basically just wrapping things up, stating your confidence and why you're qualified for the role, making sure that you're expressing your interest in interviewing for the position, and then, of course, saying thank you. So keep this in mind. A well-written cover letter is another way to demonstrate your communication skills to the employer. And also, not every candidate is going to take the time to write a cover letter either. So again, it's something that can really help set you apart from other candidates.
And our final tip is to proofread your resume and cover letter. Have another person review your documents. You know, when we're looking at these things for so long and we're writing them, sometimes we keep seeing what we want to see. And it's really important to have another set of eyes review your documents, because there could be some type of little grammatical error that spell check isn't necessarily catching for you, or maybe you omitted a word. You don't want to give the hiring manager any little reason to discount your resume if they're going through several and trying to whittle down their pile. So no matter who you are, even me, Teresa, seasoned professionals, anytime you're doing your resume, you want to make sure you're having someone else read it so that they're catching something that maybe you aren't. And as Teresa mentioned, we can help you with that. You can make a counseling session if you have downloaded the app, the Navigate app, you can make an appointment through there, or you can email us at career@roosevelt.edu. Right now, we're still working remotely, so we do have access to get the phone calls, but it's easier to catch us via email. We are checking it several times throughout the day. And then you can follow us on Roosevelt Connect. And then our other social media handle is RU Career. And let's see. The other thing I wanted to mention is, again, our career fair is coming up on April 8th. You should be able to register for that in the Handshake platform. If you're an alumnus and you don't have a Handshake account, please email us at career@roosevelt.edu and we can get you connected with that. And I think we may have had a question that we didn't. Did we answer all of them? Someone had asked earlier if they could put their scholarships down towards their activities section. And I recommended you could put it in your activities scholarship section, or you could also add it as part of your education section. Both options are acceptable. Does anyone have any other questions about resumes, cover letters, career fair?
We got another question. Would you still use reverse chronological order if you are changing careers?
You might want to use what we call a functional resume. I would recommend that you reach out to us and set up an appointment so that we can help you individually if you're trying to change careers.
Yeah, I agree. There's the functional format.
Functional
Sometimes
doesn't focus
employers
on dates.
are fine with those, and right, exactly. Functional doesn't focus on dates.
It
Some
focuses on
employers are fine with
experience.
that. Some might see that as a red flag, like what if you're trying to hide something. So I agree with Jennifer. I think having that individual conversation with us, we can help you figure out what might be the best option for you. We got
This
another
is a
question. Should middle
great
initial be
question.
used on a resume?
If you want to. The other question we've gotten before that I think is, along the same lines is, what if you go by a different name than your legal name? It's perfectly fine to put your preferred name on your resume. When you fill out your application, they're going to ask you for your legal name, and usually they also have an option now for your preferred name. But if your name is Stephanie, but you go by Tiffany, then you can put Tiffany on your resume. Whatever you go by is what you should use on your resume. That's a great question.
Right. Any other questions? We have a couple minutes.
What if we have little job experience? How can we still make a good resume? Well, what we try to encourage students to do is make sure you're getting involved with some type of organization, student organization related to your major, volunteer work, even if you've done some type of group project in class, because no matter what position you have, chances are you're going to be part of a team. And so employers want to see what role you've played on a team and what the end result was. So those are the types of things that we would help you with. You can still have a good resume if you haven't ever worked, had a paid position, or if you have little experience.
And putting a focus on your education as well, especially if you are a current student. It's a little bit different if you're somebody who graduated 10 years out, but you can put related coursework that you've completed on your resume to show employers that even if I don't have direct work experience in these different areas, I do have knowledge of these different areas based on the coursework I completed. So again, if you want to schedule an individual appointment with us, let us know, and we can certainly talk through some more tips that would work for your individual situation.
We also have a handout that has a listing of some of these formatting tips and a nice listing of different strong action verbs that we will send out to all the people who registered as well.
Great.
So hopefully that will help you too.
And one more question here: for job interviews within the same department, interviewed by supervisors who already know you, is the cover letter still used? Any thoughts on that one, Jen?
Wow, that's a good one. I would say yes. I would still do a cover letter. I wouldn't take for granted, and you don't want to be, too arrogant, too cocky. And I'm not saying you would be, but I would make sure, that they know you're taking this seriously, that you really want this job, and the cover letter is your opportunity to convey that to the employer. We're getting some great questions.
Definitely. And I think we answered everything that we've gotten.
if you have more questions, just give us send us an email at career@roosevelt.edu, and we would be happy to answer those for you. And our next webinar is next Thursday, making meaningful connections at a career fair. So we hope you can join us for that if you have not already registered for that. It was on the same registration link. We're going to send you reminders about it anyway. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. And again, if you haven't registered for the career fair, we hope you do. We will have more employers registering throughout the end of the month and setting up their interview schedule. So please take advantage of it. Even if you don't think you're, on the job market, it's a good way to network, and, it could lead into something else.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.